All right, well, let's look at the modeling then, and the questions around modeling and what is modeling, and also how the modeling is working for us in this current surge. We'll bring in to the show. I'm sure we're going to have fantastic quality sound for this one. Professor Michael Plant, University of Canterbury, School of Mathematics and Statistics. G'day, Michael. Thanks for joining us, man.
Kia ora.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. Hey, Michael, I've already sort of set up and explained why we're having a chat with you and David previously, is that the numbers appear to be, the current numbers appear to be near the top end of what was modeled prior to the surge. And we're wondering why that is and what we see in the modeling, why it's happening. And so for you, I guess I was wondering, could you explain to us sort of, I mean, it's a bit of a, maybe it's a bit of a soft question, but what is modeling? But like how you do the modeling and how it helps us understand what's happening with Omicron and the particular modeling for the Omicron surge at the moment. What are we seeing in that today versus what was modeled?
Yeah, so I mean, when we do these models, we're really sort of trying to keep track of how many people are getting infected over time, and so we simulate how the virus transmits from person to person through the population. And what happens over time is that as more people have had the virus, it starts to get harder and harder for the virus to find new people to infect. And so that process, along with things like mask use and social distancing, eventually means that cases can no longer continue to go up, and that's when we hit a peak and numbers start to come back down again. I mean, in terms of the numbers being worse than what was originally predicted, I'm not sure that's really true. If you look at the modelling we did back in January before the outbreak started, we were saying that the peak hospital number could be anywhere between 800 and 3,000. Now that's obviously a very wide range, and at the time we were saying that we were optimistic that the numbers would come in towards the lower end of that range. We have to include the sort of the top end as a worst case scenario. But we felt with the booster rates we were seeing that we would come in towards the lower end of that range, and that's more or less where we seem to be tracking still now. The case numbers have been tricky to interpret, because when we changed to using rats, we got that sudden big jump, and so we were kind of working through a bit of a backlog. They've since stabilized. The numbers have stabilized since we moved to rats, and again, it's not inconsistent with the sort of peak case numbers we were expecting before the outbreak.
How do you include in the modeling? I was going to say, not meaning to be disrespectful to people, but sort of the idiot factor. I know of several people. Actually, one of the stories that I'm isolating because of a housemate. I know, not the housemate, but I know of a connection that's caused it to come into my house, where the people refused to rat and they refused to get tested, and they were, just playing it off. Is that such a small percent it doesn't impact the modeling, or is that something you have to think about?
Yeah, it is a small percent. I guess models don't really try and include that level of fine detail. What we work on averages. And so there'll be some people who are at this end of the scale who are going to infect more people. There'll be other people at the opposite end of the scale who are very, very cautious and don't pass the virus on at all, or pass it on to fewer people than the average. When you're talking about small numbers, those details do really matter. And so if you're modeling an outbreak where there's 10 or 20 or 50 cases, that's really difficult, because if you get someone who is very different from average, that can have a big impact on what happens. Once you start to reach the stage of an outbreak where you have thousands and tens of thousands of cases, looking at the average is more reasonable, because those sorts of fringe cases cancel each other out.
You're modeling and you're looking at Omicron right now. Are you modeling and predicting what's going to happen like later on this year already? Or do you need to know and understand, what a new variant or a new surge coming in needs to be? Do you have to model quite close to the event that's happening? Or are you already modeling what's happening in December? And if there is, can you tell us what's happening for Christmas, please?
So a bit of both, and models get used in a variety of different ways. So one use is in the short term sort of projection, where we're really interested in, you know, what's going to happen in the next few weeks. When are we going to peak? How big is that peak going to be? How quickly are we going to come down off the peak? Those sorts of questions about what's happening in the next month or two. If we want to look further out, longer term, it is a lot more uncertain. We can't predict what a new variant will look like. We can say, what would happen if a variant that had these particular characteristics came along, and that might be interesting as a sort of a planning exercise. But we really can't predict the future that far ahead, because nobody knows what the next variant will be. Maybe it will be milder, but it's certainly not guaranteed. We could get a variant that's more severe or more transmissible, or that evades the immunity that we've built up to various extents. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't tell you what's going to happen next Christmas.
I didn't introduce us very well. This is Dr. Marques Azamande as well. You guys actually are on the same campus at University of Canada.
All right.
Yeah. Different schools though.
Different schools. Is there anything you want to add in, Marques, for this conversation around modeling?
No, it was really fascinating, because I think it's good to know that we're working with average. I think sometimes people forget that these things they can take only some things into consideration and not everything, and they are, they're models. It's not like you reading the tea leaves and know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a model is not a crystal ball. It's a tool to help you understand what are some of the really important processes that are helping to drive what we see in terms of cases or in terms of hospitalizations, and how different actions might change that.
I also think it's good to point out that oftentimes this conversation is so focused on the ones whose actions maybe cause more risk, or whose actions we kind of, want to expose. But I think it's really important that the average also includes people who are going above and beyond, and that can also contribute how the scenario for our future looks like. So it's not just about, what are the crazy few doing, but what are all of us doing that can also mitigate the other, I guess, like the other extremes that we can't control so well.
Is it the crazy few? I'm interested in that, Michael. Is it the crazy few? Are we seeing the people who are taking the risks and maybe not being? I mean, if there's a continuum of, lock yourself in a vault at one end and sort of licking the banister at the university at the other end of risk factor. In the modeling, where do we sit people? Is it like 2% extreme no care at the end and 2% extreme conservative? Is it an even bell curve, or are there more on the 2 years into it, sort of not really caring, not taking risks side of it, and fewer on the taking more conservative choices? Do you know where that is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, what we've seen with COVID throughout the pandemic actually is that it's quite an uneven distribution in terms of the number of people that someone passes the virus onto. And, even with these more transmissible variants, it can be that actually the majority of people don't pass the virus on at all, or maybe pass it on to one other person. And so the outbreak is sustained by the small minority of people who do pass it on to more other people. And it's not necessarily that they've done anything bad or anything wrong. It's just the nature of differences in people's movements and contacts. You will have some people who are in a job where they're just interacting with a lot of people, whereas other people may be retired or for whatever reason don't go out or don't meet people as much, and those people are far less likely to pass the virus on. So there is a huge range, and that's been a feature of COVID and other infectious diseases as well in the past.
I guess the only question, and probably the most important question, Michael, based on your modeling, what you saw pre-surge and currently, Have we seen the peak yet? When is the peak? And when are we going to be out of this current surge, I mean?
Yeah, I think in terms of the national case numbers, I think we're pretty much at the peak or very close to it. We've seen that case numbers in the Auckland region have been dropping, and nationally, as I say, I think we're pretty close to that peak. Of course, cases is only telling you one thing. It's telling you about people who go out and get tested and upload their test result into the system. So there's still a question mark about what's actually happening in terms of the number of people who are getting infected with the virus. So the other key indicator to look at is hospitalizations. That lags behind cases by a week and a half, but we are seeing that is starting to flatten out as well, and hopefully we will see a peak in the national hospital numbers at some point in the next week or so. In terms of what happens after the peak, I think the numbers will probably come down slower than what they went up, particularly with the hospitalizations. We've seen a bit of a shift in terms of the age of people who are getting infected, starting off in being really highly concentrated in young age groups, people in their teens and 20s. It's shifted a little bit over time into some of those older age groups, and hopefully that trend doesn't continue too much, but even that what we've seen so far will keep hospitalizations at a higher level for a bit longer going forward.
From the University of Canterbury, Professor Michael Plank. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the information about what's happening now, but also learning a bit more about modelling in general. It's been great. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.